All right. And then here we go. Okay, so back to last week about assessment and just some instances, some situations that you may run into when you are working with somebody who is presenting with a crisis, with trauma. So one of the things that I always regardless of the presenting issue, regardless of whatever the client is bringing to me, I build it in every single initial session, asking about any previous therapy. So as we know, like, I think a lot of people come into this field with good intentions. And just like any other job, not everybody's good at it. So it is possible that you have somebody coming to you who has had a pretty difficult experience in therapy prior, or they've had like a pretty like benign experience in therapy, but maybe there were some times where they weren't really offered the opportunity to give feedback. So maybe not everything was relevant to them. So I always like to talk about that. So, and I ask very explicitly, have you been to therapy before? Oh, yes, I have. Can you tell me anything that stood out to you that was particularly helpful? It may have been, an activity that you did. It may have been, the general demeanor of your therapist. I'm very interested in knowing these things. Is there anything that stands out to you that was not particularly helpful? And then I give them space to answer that. Conditions of its ending. So particularly with individuals who have experienced trauma, maybe something like neglect, abandonment, things like that. I'm just thinking of, the various reasons why therapy can end, just maybe somebody, their therapist became pregnant and had to go on leave. Maybe their therapist changed agencies and they weren't able to follow them. Maybe they got shuffled around in like a community mental health. So just really understanding the termination of that relationship. I really believe that termination is a like under-discussed, under-emphasized part of the work that we do. It's like a healthy goodbye is so important. A healthy transition out of that relationship is so important. I really don't think we put enough emphasis on that. So really asking about that, any sort of previous diagnosis, and if they're currently seeking treatment with any other therapist. So I will say there's been like debate on, okay, so let's say that you provide individual therapy and this person's in therapy with another therapist. There are some therapists for individual therapy, let's say. There are some therapists that have very strong feelings about that they are going to be the only provider. So some more like quote acceptable reasons for this would be if you're providing, kind of like traditional psychotherapy and then they're going to somebody specialized in EMDR or something like that. Or if you're providing couples therapy and they're going to an individual therapist. But quite frankly, it's a consumer industry that we're in, right? So if your client wants to use their insurance, for example, to work with you and then pay out of pocket to work with another person, like you can't really control that. But you are able to put parameters around that if you would like, where, if they are working with somebody else and they disclose that to you, that you may not want to work with them if they're potentially, I don't know, getting mixed messages from treatment, or if you're working with somebody else who has a very different approach than you. So you have some freedoms in that, but it's not like unethical to do that. It's up to the client's discretion. So you also want to, of course, understand, we've talked about this, but I'm just going to punctuate this, the client's living situation, their economic status, what their housing is like. Do they have, what is their personal support network? How financially secure are they? Do they have consistent employment? What kind of healthcare resources do they have? So you're always making sure that you are understanding their context. So the last piece here, again, you're going to have differing opinions on this, like whatever supervisor consultation group that you come into, but this may be just food for thought for you to think about, because this may be something that you're really uncomfortable with or something that you're super comfortable with. So a potential area of inquiry is if this person is undergoing any sort of litigation for their presenting issue. So if they're planning a lawsuit or any sort of legal action for what's happened, we could be subpoenaed. And that's, as we know, one of the reasons to break confidentiality is a subpoena, but there's many strategies. I will say largely as a field, our position is to be as unhelpful to lawyers as possible, because we're only providing them very observable, as evidenced by something observable, which is frustrating because we may be asked to act as like an expert witness, and we as a field generally don't provide that unless we're speaking very generally. So for example, if you are rising up in this field and becoming an expert on trauma, you may be called as an expert witness, but not for a client that you've had. Like you may just be the person that educates the jury around something with trauma. But generally when it's our client, we're quite protective of that, and not really willing to be helpful. So that might be something that you're just not willing to step into, and that's okay. That is something that you won't know unless you ask. So just putting it out there for you. So assessment, as you know, it can be difficult. Like when you're getting a lot of questions around something that you have historically avoided or you have not thought about in that way for a long time, it is important to set the stage for that. So really being explicit with your client that there are no right or wrong answers here, that there may be questions that are uncomfortable. The purpose of this is to not be harmful, not be hurtful. If at any point, so giving them lots of agency, asking consent along the way. So remember, therapy can be this like in vivo or in the moment, very corrective experience for your client, where if they're coming to you after a physical violation of some sort, be it sexual, physical, asking for consent to proceed can in and of itself be incredibly therapeutic and very stabilizing for the client. And then allowing them to, back away from things. If you get uncomfortable, please let me know. So also encouraging them I'm just punctuating it in a different way, encouraging them to maintain as much control as possible, giving them permission to express when they're feeling overwhelmed, when they may be feeling numb, when they may be feeling something very similar to the actual trauma experience, so kind of like this re-experiencing of the feelings of that traumatic experience. Telling them, if anything I ask you is unclear, if you're unsure, I will ask it in a different way. I will give you different words for that. I will make sure that we'll work together to make sure that you are fully understanding whatever is being asked of you, so that we're on the same page. You do not need to give details about anything. We are pacing for you. Also remember that as a therapist, we have a class that will be covering like kind of not necessarily vicarious trauma. Well, it's in a way vicarious trauma, but just how difficult this work can be for us. I mean, you're listening to, some of the worst human violations that have happened. And, you have to hold space for that. So just what that might look like for you. And at the same time, as the client is sharing this, looking for signs of destabilization. What's going on? So as you're assessing and understanding, like, their fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, like, looking for indicators of that and being very vocal in, I see you, I'm witnessing this thing. How are we doing? So that can be unsettling to be seen. So I'm so used to being invisible, used to being looked over. I have come to believe that is my space, my lane in life. I want to be seen, but I'm also very uncomfortable with being seen. So just know that, having those eyes and really seeing that person can, even though it may be something that the client really desires, it can be something pretty unsettling for them as well. But you won't know that unless because I do think it's a safe, appropriate default to see your client. So we touched on this a little bit last week. And this is a non-exhaustive list of the possible reasons why a client went under report. So I've had many supervisees when they've been at, doing maybe like the mental status exam or something like that, where there's no indication of trauma. And then they're, 4 or 5 sessions in, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, oh, I asked them this question in the first session and they said no. And now this session, they've endorsed this. And that's a very common experience for us in that room. So remember, safety first. They're feeling you out. They're coming in, especially when you're doing these like very kind of clinical assessments, there's no real warmth in it. You can be as conversational and as empathic and compassionate as you possibly can. They're still getting asked these very sterile clinical questions. So these are, I want to share these and I wanted to highlight these with you because I don't want them to be points of frustration for you. I want them to, and I don't want them to be like excuses or anything like that, but they're rationale. So, this, like, for example, number 2, this kind of like ignorance about what abuse is. Like, if this is literally all you've known and you've been like gaslit and like, your system around you has told you like, this is normal. Don't tell anybody, we're the only ones that really care about you. If you know nothing else, if you have no other messaging coming at you, that very well may be a reason that your view on this, your perspective on this is potentially skewed from somebody who hasn't had this experience or somebody who is emotionally removed from this experience. So, there's so many reasons: trauma bonding, this desire to protect your abuser, the desire to protect the perpetrator, feelings of stigma and shame. This can be experienced with men who have experienced sexual, physical, emotional abuse. There's not really a space. But anybody, just look at the individuals who do come forward and share their story. They are in no way received in a helpful, compassionate way. So even though we're sitting in a space of a therapist, of a mental health professional, in the helping field, what differentiates us from other people that they may have told their story to? So even though we have this like title, it doesn't mean that we're inherently trustworthy. So please don't take these kinds of things personally. I want you to take them into context and meet your client with a lot of grace and patience, knowing that it could be months and months and months before, their trauma narrative actually comes out. So then over-reporting is the same thing. Again, it's just understanding some of the possible reasons, not putting a label on somebody being manipulative, not putting, this negative connotation or this negative label on this individual. But understanding that, if you've had this experience, that it's like from a place of survival. So if you need to survive by really any means necessary, if that's what you've been taught by your context, you're going to potentially do things that are in your benefit, particularly if you haven't had your position validated. Are there people who take advantage of this and take advantage of us and our compassion? Absolutely. But that's not for us to judge. We're still providing a space for them. And we do have agency in this. So for example, the secondary gain, like compensation or financial benefit, you won't be the authority on deciding like the validity of this. You can just share. So again, if there's litigation, you can just share what you have witnessed. So like that, this is probably one of like the more like yucky reasons for it. You know, one of the reasons that we have a little more difficult time grappling with this. But everything else, even the secondary gain, right? They make sense in context. And the last piece here, so making sure that you are conducting other assessments along with just like a, you know, biopsychosocial or a mental status exam, and you're assessing specifically for malingering or any psychopathy. Just again, to put the individual into context, if they are, you know, flagging for some sort of malingering, if they're flagging for some sort of somatoform, like that, just all that indicates is you need a little bit more information. So in crisis, as we know, this, when you have somebody coming to you in crisis, the first step is stabilization and providing that emotional support. You want to assure the individual that they are safe, and then that you're putting together an action plan for safety. You're also normalizing any and all reactions to the crisis, and you are modeling in a calm and non-judgmental position, talking about their symptoms. So everything that you provide is a modeling of calm, you know, a modeling of comfort with uncertainty, comfort with ambiguity. That's okay. We'll figure it out. We don't need that answer right now. It's okay. Like that ambiguity is something that is very difficult for individuals who have experienced trauma, of like, what's happening. I need all the answers. That creates some safety in me. And unfortunately, it's just something that we can't always provide for our clients. So modeling that. And so also keeping in mind the decremental and incremental changes in their life can be equally triggering. So you'd think that something like a new relationship, a new, like an addition to a family, a human, a dog, an animal, a promotion, like these things that generally are met with happiness and joy and congratulations. The like kind of like paradoxical or maybe ironic piece of that is it can provide some safety. At the same time, when your body, so as we read about this week, there's a very strong physiological reaction in response to trauma, where the body goes into survival mode, protection mode, shutting off, you know, connections to places to try to mitigate the effects of the trauma. So when you are in a state of happiness or joy or comfort, consistency, safety, these defenses can be lifted. And then all of a sudden the defenses that have been there keeping kind of like this negative affect or these, you know, negative emotions at bay, they're not really there anymore. So these can trigger some trauma responses or crisis. So just, I say that because I think sometimes people are met with, but you just had a baby. Why are you sad? You just got married. What's the problem? Oh my gosh, you just got a promotion. Why have you been in bed for, you know, a week? So just know that these ironically or paradoxically absolutely can contribute to some trauma responses, some, you know, lifted defense mechanisms, so that the thoughts, the emotions, they kind of creep into your conscience when they've been, you know, kind of relegated to the depths of your consciousness.
I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to elaborate on that or clarify. So basically you're saying that when something that generally can be, you know, something that is happy, makes someone happy, like getting a new job, having a baby, if they've been affected by trauma, that type of experience can kind of reverse the effect a little bit. And because you said something about the defense, because is it because the defense is down when something like that is happening, and then they like feel triggered because it's down?
So in a way, yes. So when you have had some prolonged safety or something that brings some stability, some of the mechanisms that were created physiologically, that you've created, mentally, that maybe you're not so aware of, when you're in a place of stability and safety, those defenses can be lowered. So then those defenses that have been helping maybe suppress memories or suppress negative affects, suppress emotions, they're not so quote protective in that way. So you may have a memory, you may have a reaction to something that feels very confusing because this is a time of celebration, this is a time of happiness. Why am I thinking about my trauma experience? So does that make sense? So yes, it's the stability, the safety can lower defenses to where these things that have been in your subconscious, unconscious, whatever way you want to theorize this, I know I'm going psychoanalytic here, can come to the surface with these positive things. So you'd think like, yeah, with a death, like let's say you've experienced a trauma and now you've had a death, that makes sense because it's very akin to what you experienced. Why would the birth of a child be something that would be triggering? That would be why. Or one of the reasons why. It's not like the reason, but it's just an explanation for likely somebody coming to you and saying, I've had a lot of good things going on in my life and I don't understand why I am feeling the way I am. That is one potential explanation for it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Does that make sense, Summer?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, of course. Great question. Any other questions about anything I've covered so far? All right. Okay. So when you are assessing, so when you have that kind of initial, not even just the initial session, because remember, assessment isn't a one-time deal. Assessment is ongoing because information changes, not necessarily like the truth, but maybe access to information, a perspective, a contextual factor changes to kind of change a narrative or something like that. So don't become married to your information in your initial assessment because it can change, and it's not because they're trying to pull one over on you or lie to you or anything like that. It's just realization comes with safety, or your perspective can change. So it's not that they're lying or anything like that. It's just that their awareness may be different. So you're asking for these objective factors. So who, what, when, where, how long, the severity, progression, any use of force, physical injury. So again, these may be things that your client becomes reactive to. So you're going to pull your foot off the gas with these, but you are wanting to know like what happened. And then of course the subjective experience too, like what were they thinking? How were they feeling? What did they believe about themselves? What they believe about the situation. So just being sensitive and aware of both the objective and the subjective experience. So as I've said before, I'll highlight it again. You want to ask all these questions in a very direct way. So we're not talking, for example, if you have a client who has shared some suicidal ideation, you don't ask the question, are you thinking about hurting yourself? You use the term kill. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you contemplated ending your life? So you don't want to dance around. One, if I haven't highlighted this already, I'll say it again. It indicates some level of discomfort from you. So you have this person who has experienced trauma, who is in crisis, who may be very, very used to looking at context clues, right? If I'm constantly surveying my safety, I'm going to be very aware of the reactions, the body language, everything about the people that are around me, because I need to act accordingly. So if you are talking like very hesitantly or not using direct language, your client is going to notice that and they'll shy away from that too. So just call things what they are. Say rape, say kill, say whatever happened. They're not bad words, they're the person's truth, and that's their experience. So you don't have to be crass about it, but just being confident in the language and how you are posturing gives permission to the client and tells the client, I am comfortable talking about this. This is a place where you can talk about this. Let's do it. So just please get comfortable and using language like that. You can, practice with people, in your personal life. You can practice with your supervisor, practice with your colleagues, but just get comfortable saying words that may create a response in you. And if they do, that's important to know. Then that's work that you need to do, because we're working with people at the, potentially some of the worst times of their life with the most horrific experiences that they've experienced and that humans can experience. So you've got to be comfortable using that language. So you also, while you're doing this, so you're saying, using very direct language in a very supportive fashion, staying very attuned to what you're seeing. So looking at the toll that the questioning is taking on the client and pacing accordingly. So you may have some clients who are who don't show an outward reaction. So they may be talking about the trauma very matter-of-factly. So again, that isn't necessarily an indicator of disassociation or anything like that, but it may be. So they also may have some delayed responses that occur later when they are more like connected to their emotional experience with this. They also may, as they're talking, like dissociate to the point where they're not aware of what they're saying. So you may come back and say, okay, so you were talking about this, and they'll be like, I never said that. And you might be like, wait, what? So just know that that's an indicator of potential dissociation. It could also be that they are freaking out that they actually told somebody about it, and then they're going to deny that because they're concerned about the repercussions, not only for themselves, but maybe the people that they've implicated. So just, I share all of this for you to be open to all of those possibilities as to why somebody may deny having said something that you're like, I know you said that, I just heard that with my ears. So that's not a time to like engage in a debate with them to say 10 minutes ago, you literally just said this. Because what the stance that I take is, if this happens, to say, okay, well, I'm very sorry for any misunderstanding. This is what I heard. Can you help me? Can you share with me again what happened, to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly? So you're going to take this stance of like, oh, I must have misheard, because it's not about like ego or being right or anything like this. You are in the space of building rapport. So please don't let your ego come into this, and go ahead and back off and have them clarify. And if they say, I have no idea where you got any of that, I'm very sorry about that. I must have misheard. Are you comfortable moving forward? So that's all data. You're not only listening to the content, you're looking at this entire process too. So that's an indicator to you of possible dissociation, possible freaking out about like, oh my gosh, I can't believe another human just heard this story. What does that mean? What's going to happen to me? So just knowing that it's generally all of these can, the theme in them is self-protection, survival. And you may also like never see that person again, because they may not be in a space where they're ready to share this. So again, there's so many reasons why clients don't come back to therapy. So just, and many times you'll never know, but I just wanted to share all of those possibilities with you. So being specific, sorry, I just got a bunch of emails if you guys can hear those. So you want to also recognizing that these reactions are possible, like get out in front of them and say, hey, listen, we're going to be covering a lot of stuff today. Here are some possible reactions that you might have, not only in session, but after session. I want you to know that these things are very normal, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of in this. And we can, talk about this at next session. But again, going back to some of the PowerPoint, some of the lectures that we've had previously, of letting them know, hey, I'm available. Here's my cell phone number. Here's my office. I'll be in my office available to you from blah, blah, like this time to this time, so they may be in this state of a lot of vulnerability of like not being sure what to do with another human being knowing so much about their story. So just letting them know this happens. The reactions can be kind of delayed, and here are some things that you can do to manage them. Let's brainstorm. It's almost like safety planning, but in a little different way of like, if you were to become activated, if you were to become escalated, like here are some things that we can put into place to try. And you kind of want to tier them, right? Just like you would a safety plan of like, if this doesn't work, you have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, plan E. So there's a person's always feeling like they have some kind of safety net, some kind of option. And being very explicit that the client is supported and safe, and anything that they report is confidential, but being very explicit about when you can't maintain confidentiality. So you want to be very familiar with the reasons why you have to take any information outside of the therapy room. And then, like I said earlier, a modeling of tolerance for uncertainty. Just uncertainty and ambiguity can be incredibly distressing, destabilizing for somebody who has felt a lack of control for a long time. So when they're in a space where they may be able to have information or control, or if they've been in this state where they never know what's going on, things are very inconsistent, very unpredictable, that having that continued outside of that experience is very distressing. So just having a conversation and modeling that it's okay to not know, we'll figure it out together. Here are some ways we can do that. Sometimes these are things we can't know, like, let's talk through this. So just being very explicit about that. Also saying, like, being explicit with your client that, just because you shared this doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily feel better. Sharing it is a very important step in this process. But just talking about it isn't enough to resolve how you're feeling. Because I think that's a very common misconception about a trauma narrative, is all I have to do is say something and then I'll feel magically better, where they may feel some relief, but it generally isn't long lasting. Like, there has to be some very explicit and difficult processing and work that goes into that. So let's say that you have a client that's been referred to you for trauma, or in the intake, they've indicated it or something like that. And then they don't disclose in that initial session, or maybe for several sessions. You don't have to look too much into it. If you're going to kind of have a default stance on this, assume safety and readiness, but it's usually safety, that they're just feeling you out. So if you may develop a suspicion or a theory or something that has happened, I would encourage you to keep that close to your chest, maybe bookmark it. But I wouldn't be like, well, based on what I'm observing here, you're, demonstrating classic symptoms of da 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 da. So it leads me to believe that you've experienced some sort of trauma. I wouldn't. It's because you don't want to lead the client, because I'm just thinking of other supervisees that I've had where maybe they do have a client who has had a trauma history, who who's very agreeable. So maybe their response to trauma is fawn. So they'll just go with it. You're a professional, you're the expert. I don't necessarily personally agree. Like, so I'm talking as a client. The client, don't necessarily agree with that, but you're the expert. So you must know something I don't know. So we are in a position of power with that. So if there's a specific memory that's absent, don't speculate about it. Don't try to confirm your suspicions. Again, this is a space where you will be modeling comfort with uncertainty. This doesn't really add up in my calculations of my brain. I'm going to let this play out. Because if you become very rigid in a belief, everything that you do is going to be working to confirm that belief. So if you're like, I know for a fact that this person has experienced trauma. They haven't disclosed it. I just know it. They're just not ready. I just know it. You can find yourself asking very leading questions, being kind of suggestive, planting, where you're like, all right, well, they said this story about their parent. So I'm going to ask these very specific questions about the parent to maybe like elicit something from them. Maybe they just need some help in disclosing. So really, really try to not do that, and just be patient with the client. And again, that default can be maybe it's not safe. Maybe I'm misreading this situation. Maybe I don't have enough information. I need supervision on this. I need to seek consultation. So whenever you're feeling stuck in that way, just remember our field is built on collaboration. So get a different viewpoint on it. So I'm not going to go super deep into any of this, but I just want to let you know that these things exist to kind of put in your pocket for later. So any generic psychological inventories and structured clinical interviews. So whenever you are interpreting the profile, consider reports or suspicions of traumatization to avoid misinterpretation of the symptoms. So something like, for example, the MMPI. Doesn't have anything explicit for trauma, but something like borderline would come up, something like DID would come up, schizophrenia might come up. And so when you are doing these psychological inventories, do yourself a favor and have a lens of trauma and allow that to potentially be a reason as to why certain things are flagging or why things are popping up in the profile. So it's not, so you're never taking these just as is without further investigation and other explanation for what you're seeing. So when you are doing these generic, something like the MMPI, the MCM, that you are also potentially complementing these with measures of post-traumatic and dissociative symptoms and disorders, traumatic events and experiences, an assessment of their attachment style, psychophysiological, biological, neurological, and medical assessment. So that is something that I will always encourage you to do when you are out in the field, is to have a medical assessment of your clients. So like, it may take a while if they don't have insurance, but regardless of insurance status, individuals have access to that. Again, it may be 6 months out or something, but if you don't have that biological, kind of neurological piece, you're not working with all the information that could help you put that person into context. And as we know, if there's something organic that is physiologically, biologically happening, psychotherapy is not going to do much for it at all. Maybe change the perspective on it, but it's not actually going to get to the root of anything because that's not our lane. Okay, so I did want to highlight about collateral assessment. So do with this what you'd like. I think this is a little bit of this is a approach that needs to be thought through carefully. You need to be very thoughtful in moving forward with this. So collateral information is basically information from other people that know your client, who are maybe present during the incident. They're sources of information external to treatment. If you decide that you would like to interview, gather information from other people that were part of the experience, the situation, whatever, this should never be done unilaterally. This should always be very explicitly discussed with your client, and you better have a damn good reason for wanting to do it. So you want to have a very solid justification as to why you want to. If your client says no, I really encourage you to honor that. It could be a rupture if you go against them and say, I appreciate you sharing this with me, I am going to move forward with this. That could be a rupture that is potentially irreparable. So just putting that out there. So getting their explicit permission. You don't always have to talk to people. You could have other sources like files, something written. So, you know, you're just putting together something to potentially like corroborate a story. But again, I don't like, to me, this would be something where like a client would volunteer a journal. Or they would volunteer pictures or a recording of some sort. I don't really see, and so I'm saying this because I'm very much open to the other beautiful minds in this group of, if you're not like a detective or you're not a lawyer, I don't really see a good justification for needing to like corroborate a disclosure. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I'm aware of the weight of what I just said. And I'm also aware that I could absolutely be missing something. So does anybody have any thoughts on collateral, like a collateral assessment of gathering information from other people or other sources, and the potential like pros and cons of that?
Do you mean, for example, when you're talking to the clients, like let's say they're social worker and trying to construct?
That I would argue that that's different, that is like the like network of care. So so you would have to get a disclosure for that. So for you to talk with another mental health professional or any other professional, that the role in this person's life is professional, you have to have a release of information for that. So this would be where it would be like less formal, where I would say, hey, Daniel, you know, you mentioned that your mom was there when this happened. Would it be okay if I talk to her? Like, let me tell you what I want to gather. So it wouldn't be a person in a professional role. It would be somebody in more of a personal or social role with the person.
I see. I did have a bit of an example like that too, actually. It's like you say, you know, sometimes like if you have hesitations about things or things that you might want to do with a client, then yeah, you should hold and go through supervision first to just get your stuff in a row, right? To see. And I remember I had a hesitation, but I didn't think it was pretty harmless at the time, but it was still kind of early with, I think I had like a third session with this person. And I asked him, it had to do with relating with mom, because mom had made peace with a lot of the crisis that they had experienced like decades ago. And I thought, well, yeah, that's pretty remarkable. You know, mom has something value. What would you say if we brought mom in and did, you know, work together? Which was above my call for sure. But I was just curious about that. Like, would they be willing to bring in mom? And
yeah,
we thought about it for a second. It's a flat no.
I would,
yeah, because they were like, you know, this is my therapy, not there.
Absolutely. And I would argue as couple and family therapists, that would be something that we generally offer because we're systems thinkers, right? So I will if anyone is mentioned from the client, I will say, would this be someone that you would want to join us in session? And then they're usually like, why would we do that? Like, what would that help? But as systems thinkers, our default really is to invite as many people into the room as we can who are relevant. Because obviously not everybody in that person's world is relevant, but yeah, so to me that indicates, Daniel, like a leaning into your CFT identity, which is cool. So yeah, I invite everybody. You've mentioned your grandma. Is she local? Would you be interested in Zooming her in if she's not? And I would say 50% of the time I'll get a yes, but that's okay. You're just saying if at any time they would be interested, or you think it might be beneficial, like I'm equipped to do that and I'm open to doing that. So just, kind of planting the seed there. Okay, I'm just going to go for a couple more minutes before we take our first break. I think we actually are going to get through everything today, guys. We'll see. I probably shouldn't say that. So another just like assessment or like data point, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I speak too researchery, that you could use just to, when you're unsure about maybe where the person's at within like the trans theoretical model, right? The stages of change. I just wanted to point this out to you as a potential measure or an instrument for you, the therapeutic movement instrument. So if you're maybe feeling stuck, or not sure about like, maybe you have some expectations around progress, so you should check those. Because anytime you're feeling frustrated about change or movement in a client, I always encourage my students to like check their expectations, because their idea of progress might be very different from the client's. But this is an instrument that could help you maybe give you some information about like how to temper your expectations. So like what might movement with this person look like? What might a pace look like for movement with this person? And then before we take our break, so the comprehensive and descriptive diagnosis. So if you utilize any of the formulations for like PTSD, like, complex PTSD, developmental trauma disorder. So the complex and developmental, neither of them are in the DSM. But if you take the constructs, so the idea behind it, the theory behind it, that might be helpful to you, because if you just take the formulation of PTSD, you may be missing something. So it may not be, so here it says the therapist who utilizes one of these formulations, so complex PTSD, developmental trauma disorder, will likely find them highly applicable and useful, but must be aware that complex PTSD or complex traumatic stress disorders are not freestanding diagnoses in the DSM. So they're not in the DSM, and they shouldn't be assigned, because if you are working with insurance, they won't accept it. But you might be able to, so this is where you kind of have to play with the DSM a little bit in terms of diagnosis of, it may not fit quite right, but you would be very explicit with your client about why you've done it, what you're seeing, where it's a mismatch, where it's applicable. So just, working with the DSM and working with insurance is always, it can feel very restrictive. And that's at this point, just kind of a reality of the work that we do is therapists and insurance companies, we don't get along great. We don't speak the same language. We don't care about the same things. So that's just a system that we're working within. So maybe I can create 15 individuals who want to buck the system and work on changing it. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and take a break, and I will see you all back at 11:10.
Dr. Lappin, I have a quick question, if that's okay.
I'm here. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. All right, now we're going to get into Herman's text. And then move into this week's material. Oh, what's that? Okay. So Herman's text on terror and disconnection. So just some information for you about how trauma can manifest, how it can present itself. So we'll be talking a lot more in detail about this in our material for this week. So traumatic reactions occur when action is of no avail. So what we will talk about it this week of, that social connection is the first line. Then there's a fighting. And then when you can't do it, when you're finding that neither of those are helpful, there's the response to freeze or to relinquish, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of control. So some symptoms of this are hyperarousal, which is this persistent expectation of danger. So you can, ask questions about this, read nonverbals about this, the experience of intrusion, this indelible imprint of the traumatic moment. So it's, coming into the forefront of one's consciousness in waking states, in sleeping states, and then constriction. So this is the numbing response of surrender. So surrender, that was the word that I was looking for, instead of relinquish. So this is constricting kind of your emotional range to the point where you're also, in order to not feel terror, distress, all of the negative emotions that come with things like hyperarousal or intrusion or just that traumatic experience, you also impact your range of positive emotions as well. So in hyperarousal, what you can see is the person startling quite easily, reacting irritably to seemingly small provocations, and sleeping poorly. So, this disproportionate response of emotion to the given situation. So again, it's the default is not what's wrong with you, it is what happened to you. That's what we're constantly wanting to understand. And then the traumatic event appears to recondition the human nervous system, which we will talk about in a little bit. So then with the intrusion, it's as if time stops at the moment of trauma. So even when, you are talking to a client about something historical, it may be that they go right back into the emotion and the experience. We talk about this a lot with PTSD and flashbacks. So then this traumatic moment becomes encoded in this abnormal form in memory where it has no real timestamp. It can come in spontaneously without a seeming reason into our consciousness. So again, these flashbacks can be during waking states. They can also be in the form of traumatic nightmares. So it's just this lack of any control over what you're experiencing from your traumatic experience. So these memories, so when you're asking somebody to, potentially when you're asking somebody to talk about this, it may, so when the presentation is intrusion, it may be very fragmented. The person may have a lot of difficulty sharing what has happened. Where maybe for those of you who are going through the TFCBT training, you may be at the module where they have the child share their narrative or start to share it. But the baseline assessment for that is to just tell a story about something that happened to you that was pretty benign or maybe even funny or something. So you're seeing the person's cadence, you're seeing their vocabulary, their ability to articulate, their ability to stay present while they're sharing the story. And then, so that's your baseline assessment of like one's just general ability to tell a story and to recall. And then you will ask them about their trauma narrative. And then you may see a very different storytelling capability, presence, all of these things. So just know that these memories are very difficult to articulate because they have this lack of a verbal narrative, a lack of context, a lack of, kind of chronology. And they're encoded in these vivid sensations and images that may be very difficult to make sense of, to share with another person. So what it's theorized to happen is that in these states of high sympathetic nervous system arousal, so remember, sympathetic nervous system, it hits the gas, the parasympathetic nervous system hits the brake. So when you're in this state of like full throttle, the linguistic encoding of memory is inactivated. So that the part of your brain that like connects language to an experience and being able to share it, it's not online. And then the central nervous system reverts to the sensory and iconic forms of memory that predominate in early life. So it's like there's this, you revert to essentially like an earlier, what's the word I'm looking for? Like I'm trying to think of like a computer term or something, but just an earlier time in your body's development. So sometimes people can reenact the traumatic moment with a fantasy of changing the outcome. So like in an effort to gain some agency. So they may go back to the place where they experienced a sexual assault. They may return to the person who kept them in captivity. So they're doing these things to kind of like change the narrative, right? So if I can change the outcome, if something different can happen, maybe I can stop experiencing all of this. And as we know, that can put somebody in further harm. But again, it's not this, we wouldn't meet them with shame, right? We wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? That's so dangerous. All right, I understand that. Let's also talk about the dangers of that. And let's also talk about kind of the futile attempt that you're making for changing your experience. So if you haven't assimilated these traumatic experience, they're stored in what's considered an active memory, which has a tendency to repeat the representation of contents. So this trauma is only resolved when the survivor can develop a new mental schema for understanding what happened. So it's not about, going back to the place where the traumatic event occurred, harming somebody who, perpetrated violence, or I don't know, sending a letter to, I don't know, just something that would try to undo or to change it. It's really an internal experience. So then last on this, it's constriction. So in avoiding any situations reminiscent of the past trauma, or any initiative that might involve future planning that may have risk, people who have experienced trauma deprive themselves of any new opportunities for successful coping. So the kind of like ironic, paradoxical piece of this is that in an attempt to protect yourself, you're keeping that trauma alive. So they are an attempt to defend yourself against this overwhelming emotional state, but the price is the protection that they afford. So like with people, so like reaching out to people, you're not going to do that when your response is constriction, or your response is constriction. So the people that could provide some help to you, you're not engaging with, you're not sharing with. So the constrictive symptoms also narrow and deplete the quality of life and ultimately perpetuate the effects of the traumatic event. So the exact thing that you're using to try to protect yourself is what's keeping you stuck there, which is, generally what people come to therapy for. what was once working is no longer working. So the dialect of trauma is basically like these opposing states of intrusion and constriction. So being completely emotionally overwhelmed, not present, in the reliving state, and then constriction of, not feeling anything, not having really any range of emotions, but just knowing that these are things that can oscillate within a person. So just knowing that these can both simultaneously be existing. Okay, so on disconnection. So trauma can destroy an individual's fundamental assumptions about safety in the world. So particularly with children, their understanding of the world is that it is dangerous, it is unsafe, it hurts, it's violent. So what this also does is it doesn't allow for the individual to have a positive value of self or any meaningful order of anything. So there's this sense of alienation that pervades every relationship, from the most intimate ones with their family to just like even people within a community that are more peripheral. So just understanding how trauma affects your social system. And that's why you will always see social connection as a part of every single model for treatment of trauma. So the damaged self, this sense of connection with caring people, is the foundation of personality development, and individuals who don't have that can affect their personality and can affect the way that they present, interact, navigate the world. So what traumatic events do is they violate the person's sense of autonomy, again, on a basic bodily level. I don't have control over my own body. These very physical parameters, these very physical boundaries, they're not even mine to uphold. I have no say over this. So if I have no say over what this shell that I'm in, how could I possibly create an emotional boundary? How could I create boundaries that aren't even visible? So the basic sense of autonomy is violated, and has to be learned how to create boundaries and how to uphold boundaries, and even learned what they are. So a traumatic event can destroy the belief that one can be themselves in relation to others. So again, thinking about, if I constantly have to be vigilant about what's going on around me and the people around me in order to protect myself, to survive through this, I'm not attending at all to like my desires, my values. I'm not even taking time to explore those things, because that's a privilege. That is a privilege that's not afforded to everyone. So to be able to learn about yourself, take time to explore and experiment, that as the baseline, like foundation to be able to do that is safety. And if that's not there, then you're constantly looking at others. So you don't know how to be just you. You learn how to cater to other people and act in a way that can protect you, but you don't know who you really are. So in the aftermath of any traumatic events, survivors can review and judge their own conduct. They can have feelings of guilt and inferiority, I should have done this, I could have done this, why did I act in this way? So it can really generate a lot of guilt, embarrassment, and shame. And then the identity that they formed prior to the traumatic event is forever changed. So again, that integration of this fluent timeline in a person's life of, there's this like pre-trauma, the traumatic event or chronic traumatic events, and then now that hopefully the trauma is no longer existing in their life, but now it's, what do I make of all of these times where I felt completely different people? So this was one thing that I kind of just wanted to bring to the class, because this book talks a lot about things like the Vietnam War and just like wars that have been, before our time, or we were very young at the time. So one of the things that Dr. Herman said in this is some of the vets that came back after combat in Vietnam had a lot of difficulty with feeling as though they were fighting not only like an unwinnable war, but a war that didn't really have purpose. So I was just curious because I'll be incredibly transparent about my knowledge in this. I'm not well integrated into armed forces. I don't know a ton of people or talk to a ton of people who have experienced combat. So I'm just being very transparent about my position in this. About some of the narratives coming back from Afghanistan, of some troops, particularly after President Biden pulled us out of there, saying like, this has been a 20-year war that I don't understand why we were there. So I know that that's not every veteran's position on this, but I just wanted to kind of connect it to our readings and see if anybody had any thoughts on that, where so it says in our reading, in a study of Vietnam veterans, about 20% of the men admitted to having witnessed atrocities during their tour, and about 9% acknowledged personally committing atrocities. And also feeling as though their time really didn't serve a meaningful purpose. So I'm just curious if any of you, if you care to share, if you've heard anything like that from anyone coming back or who has fought in the Afghanistan war. Just curious about its like current relevance in terms of combat veterans and what we might be seeing in our offices of people really grappling with some of the experiences that they've had, and what did it mean, what did it benefit, what was its purpose? Yeah, Daniel, go ahead.
So as a veteran, I've talked about this with a few of my shipmates, like that they've been around for, and I think the way you described it, there is kind of like two groups emerging from conversations, which is like, what was it all for? Was it a waste? And then there's the other group that feels that it wasn't in vain, but that we didn't succeed and fulfill what. And then there's also like a third that feels like tries to do a little center line, which is that we did fulfill certain objectives, but we got overstretched and got sent in to do things that aren't really for the military, as far as building community and building inroads and trying to kind of promote democracy and stuff like that. We're basically a fighting force and an occupying force. And so there's a lot of, in the military, like there's not a lot of, like we're Republican and we're Democrats. You can kind of transcends a little bit. People still hold their political leanings, but it's not, you can literally, it's kind of strange because in the civilian world, it's kind of like, it's really divisive. You can, family and friends turn each other off with that stuff. But with, when you've served with people, it kind of transcends. So it was interesting to see those conversations happening again and to have the political ideology also referencing, but there is a sort of, that there isn't really a definition for victory or fulfilling a mission, that we just basically, there's also like, just to kind of wrap up real quick, like there's two groups, like there will be one group that feels that everything was done in vain, because there was loss, and then there's people that really like lost people that they know, like, and then there's the other group that feels that it can never really be in vain because we fulfilled our part, our service, our duty,
Sure.
but that the politics of it, that's not really our part.
Mhm.
That's the country, that's the civilians. So there's a bit of trauma in trying to figure that out, and discussions. I think that most service members are more comfortable discussing within their group than with people that are just, it feels like the country was just chiming in towards the end because it's been 20 years
Mhm.
and it was in the background. And now it's up in the front. So there's a lot of sensitivity and discussion going on within the community, but that seems to be the two campgrounds, like how you described, that
Yeah.
kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, and I'd be curious if there's a correlation between those two positions and symptoms of PTSD. My guess would be that the individuals who don't really see meaning in it and are struggling to find the purpose, may be struggling more so with their mental health. So just being aware of that, of the, like, you know, and I think you make a beautiful point here, Daniel, of, you know, regardless of your personal political leaning, which it's there, you know, that's a part of us. You shouldn't deny that. You know, that's not something that you need to, shy away from in the room. That is something that will absolutely have an influence because we're humans and we are inherently flawed in that way. At the same time, you know, if you have a person that is struggling with that and shares some sort of, you know, like political leaning or some sort of belief system that you don't agree with, that is something that you will absolutely have to work through in supervision and understand, you know, how can I provide the best quality care? Because you know, in our field, it's not unethical, but it's not the most ethical thing to say, hey, I have a different belief system from this person, therefore I must refer out. Because that's not really, to me, it's not attending to like the pillars of what we do in terms of flexibility and openness, of really taking the time to understand another human being who may see the world differently from you. So I think that, to me, that's an example of a lot of moving parts that are rolled into the reality of what could be happening in that room. So thank you for sharing that, Daniel. Does anyone else have any thoughts about just the relevance of, you know, our the ending of that war that has been here for nearly our entire lives?
I don't have anything specific to add regarding that, but I'm thinking more kind of zooming out at a bigger picture.
Sure.
Psychology of that, and how it kind of makes sense that, again, we don't have the research to back it up, but it would make sense that the individuals who didn't really see a purpose would have more PTSD symptoms, because it's kind of an existential crisis at that point.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
this sense of purpose and like, what was the meaning behind it?
Right.
And again, I've never been to war. I've never killed another person, because that sounds like it would be traumatizing. But at the same time, I'm purposefully exaggerating this. If I had a chance to kill Hitler, I might not be traumatized by that. Like, again, that's an extreme exaggeration, but if I have the sense of purpose and the sense that I'm doing something good or killing a bad guy, I might feel a whole lot different than if I left and didn't see the reason or purpose behind what it was that I was doing, even if it was, you know, atrocities or, you know, things of that sort.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And the reason I said it the way that I did is to not assume that because somebody saw purpose in what they did, that they aren't also struggling with that. So the likelihood that somebody is struggling with something that they don't see a purpose in, that they don't understand the meaning behind it, would potentially like kind of on a scale of struggle, which is very difficult to quantify, that it may be more like obvious or what we consider kind of a squeaky wheel in our field. But just because somebody has they believe in what they did and they see purpose with what they did, please don't assume that they're not also struggling in some way. That was just the reason I said it the way that I did. All right, let's finish last week's stuff. All right, so taking context in consideration, right? So again, I know I self-disclosed with all of you about the passing of my mom. And when I was reading about this and as I was creating this PowerPoint, I just thought of how categorically different my experience was with my mom's death than my sister's. So same household, we are 6 years apart. So developmentally, we were in different spaces. There were different people, but it was the exact same event and we had very different experiences with it. So just remembering that, okay, we grew up in the same household. In my estimation, for my experience, we were raised pretty similarly. I do very strongly believe in birth order and how parenting is affected by like the number of children in the family and stuff like that. But just taking into consideration things like childhood history, emotional conflicts, adaptive style. I would argue that emotional conflicts and adaptive style within myself and my sister are very different. And then also understanding that any sort of experience with terror or disempowerment during adolescent affects, it compromises 3 normal adaptive tasks at this stage of life. So if you've experienced it in adolescence, you very well may be experiencing some disruptions in the formation of identity, the gradual separation from one's family of origin, and the exploration of a wider social world. So these are all things that are, normative for that time. But if you're experiencing terror, disempowerment, something like captivity, these stages are interrupted and damaged and need to be, there needs to be an intervention or some sort of healing that happens with that. Okay, so the effective social support, very important. One of the reasons why we encourage this and have this as a part of all of our treatments is once there's a sense of safety, the individual who is coming to you or the family that is coming to you, they need help outside of you. You can't be their sole social support. Might you be very important toward the beginning and potentially need to be a little bit more available than you may be with other clients? Potentially, that's a choice of yours. You can absolutely put boundaries around that. But once that individual feels safe, the integration into a social world with safe individuals, with accepting, embracing, consistent individuals is very important. So the regulation of intimacy and aggression that can be disrupted by trauma should be restored. So again, this doesn't have to happen. Intimacy isn't specific to romantic relationships. Intimacy is there in any sort of close relationship that you may have, whether it is platonic, familial, romantic, but just learning how to be vulnerable without needing to protect. So again, that's where trauma can be overlooked with borderline. So again, it's that I hate you, don't leave me. I'm only going to let you close enough for me to like smack you away. So this requires others to show tolerance for that person's, for the survivor's fluctuation. And so there's so this is where, as couple and family therapists, I think we're very equipped to help in that social support aspect, where we can coach people through this, of educating them around the effects of trauma, how that manifests interpersonally, and understanding where that person may need some closeness, where they need some distance, and then this respecting them where they're trying to reestablish their autonomy and self-control in ways that they don't know how. So they're going to flub it. They're going to maybe hurt people. They're going to maybe say something hurtful. So being aware of that. So gender expectations, and I will be very honest here, it's, a lot of our readings are very binary. So it's overlooking to me the spectrum of gender identity. So at the same time, there is this male entitlement that is in our society. It is undeniable. So many women, so again, looking binary, and it's also heteronormative here, we're accustomed to accommodating potentially partners' desires and subordinating. So women can do that even in consensual sex. So again, this may not be something that is distressing or anything like that, but it's something to put into context of just kind of how our society functions. So what can happen is that after an experience of rape, a survivor may say, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like, I'm not going to give in to my or accommodate my partner's desires. I'm not going to subordinate. I'm not going to just do what my partner wants. I no longer can accept that. So potentially, to reclaim their sexuality, a rape survivor needs to establish a sense of autonomy and control in their sexual, not only in their person, but in their sexual being as well, their sexuality. So again, I know that this is very gendered in the language here. This is applicable to really any gender. It is applicable to any gender, but again, the male entitlement, I would say the cisgender male entitlement is pervasive in our society. So this is something to be aware of. So if the individual who has been raped is ever to trust again, they need to cooperate and they need to have a cooperative and sensitive partner who doesn't expect sex on demand. So again, this is where us as couple therapists, as family therapists, can absolutely step in with our expertise on, couple relations, interpersonal relations. And again, I want to highlight what I said earlier. The first task of conscious raising is simply calling rape by its true name. So not dancing around what it is. And then last but not least, the role of community. I won't go too much into this, but just understanding that creating community is one of the most powerful and helpful pieces of trauma recovery and reintegration, and a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, a sense of being. So also understanding, so this is talking specifically about sexual assault and rape, of how the legal system is not set up to support survivors. That it may be, so if you have an individual who comes to you who has experienced a sexual assault or a rape, that it may be really meaningful for that person to join a movement, because knowing that, again, our legal system is really set up to protect perpetrators. I don't know why I keep saying perpetrators, that the action may need to be taken outside of the legal system. So offering up to the client to join movements, to volunteer, that might be something that is very healing for that individual. All right. Questions, comments, anything on that before we just keep trucking to this week's? All right, where am I? All right, here we are. Okay. So now moving to the brain and all of the stuff that happens inside of us with trauma. I hope that you all enjoyed what you've read so far of The Body Keeps the Score. Again, I'm very biased. I think it's a great book. Okay, so going to I think chapter 4. This didn't have a title to it, but I titled it myself. So this was when the author was talking about the child who drew like a trampoline off the side of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And so showing some of the, kind of the importance of the environment that child is in, of in terms of traumatic responses that children really take lots of cues from their parents. So if you haven't seen it yet with the integration of parents into the TFCBT, there is a whole section on coaching the parent, recognizing that the parent absolutely might have a very, explicit, expressive distress to the trauma that their child has experienced, and the importance of modeling that calm and what we label resilience. So again, talking about that fight, flight, or freeze response and fawn. So when we have a traumatic experience, or stressful, let's say this is more a stress response. When we have a stressful experience, the systems within our brain hop into action to send signals to our organs within our body. And then when the stress is over, when the event is over, then, so the sympathetic nervous system fires up for the stress, and then the parasympathetic nervous system fires up to calm us back down. But when we are in trauma or prolonged trauma, or the normal response, this like up and down response is blocked, then your brain keeps secreting these stress chemicals. And then when the brain continues to fire in that way, it's essentially rewired. And then it continues to fire when it shouldn't. And so we'll be talking about, I'll be demonstrating to you and showing you some videos on the HPA axis and allostatic load. So what happens is, after the event has passed, the brain is still sending signals to the body that there's a threat and that you need to escape. So it's literally rewiring your body to respond in a different way to activating events. So this is just like the signals. So from the pituitary gland, the P of the HPA axis, that during trauma, your executive functioning, your prefrontal cortex is essentially disengaged, and you're functioning a lot from your limbic system, from your, the part of your brain that's the reptilian brain, or the most, it's the most activated by immediate needs. So this is the part of the brain that is online when we're born. So I'm hungry, feed me. I pooped my pants, change me. I'm tired, take me to bed. So just seeing where all the signals are coming from. So all the back of the brain into all of the parts of the body that are responsible for our stress response. So I just blew this up from the book. So the rational brain is concerned with the world around us. So we have two opportunities to kind of like work with the brain. It's that top down approach or the bottom up approach. So understanding how things and people work and figuring out how to accomplish our goals and manage time. So this is the rational brain, the executive functioning of the brain. And then beneath the rational brain, there's two evolutionarily older and separate that oversee everything else. So there's the moment-to-moment registration of the body's physiology, and then the identification of comfort, safety, threat, hunger, fatigue, desire, longing, excitement, pleasure, and pain. So this is the frontal brain. This is the limbic system. This is what is affected and taken offline during a traumatic experience or a very, very stressful experience. So we need to address basic housekeeping. So if we are not sleeping well, if we are not eating, if we are not digesting, if we are constantly in a state of arousal, treatment is not going to be helpful to us. So we have to attend to these necessary activities in our body and in our brain that keep us alive. So like I said earlier, neurons that fire together, wire together. So if this circuit fires repeatedly, it can become a default setting. So if you feel safe and loved, your brain becomes specialized in exploration, play, and cooperation. But if you are frightened, if you feel frightened and unwanted, it specializes in managing feelings of fear and abandonment. So again, very important. A lot of van der Kolk's work is on children. And so he was the person that proposed a diagnosis in the DSM that was denied, because then we would actually have to look at childhood trauma and address it. And I don't know, I guess people don't want to do that. Okay, so yeah, that's your default. It just really shapes the way that you see the world and the safety that you feel within the world. So the interpersonal neurobiology, this is crucial for understanding trauma. So the frontal lobes are also the seat of empathy. So our ability to feel into someone else. So again, if it's not online, if it is not being utilized, if the majority of the activity is happening in your limbic system, you're not going to be so attuned to other people. You're going to really be like in terms of empathy. So it's which is different from hypervigilance. So trauma also involves not feeling seen, not being mirrored, not being considered. So if you are not attended to, you very well may not know how to attend to other people, again, outside of survival, outside of viewing what's going on and assessing the situation that way. So with treatment, we need to reactivate the capacity to safely mirror and be mirrored by others. So we're the mirror. We're the ones seeing the client and offering them an ability to also see another person. So without these active, flexible frontal lobes, we become creatures of habits and our relationships become superficial and routine. So again, it's just keeping people close enough to not feel too vulnerable. So there's the cook and the smoke detector. As we know, the cook is the thalamus. And sorry, I messed up the name here. I don't know what I was doing. So then there's the smoke detector, which is the amygdala. And then, so the amygdala is identifies whether there's incoming input that's relevant to our survival. So essentially what happens is the smoke detector is going off way too often. So normally the smoke detector is good at picking up danger cues, but trauma increases the risk of misinterpreting like not dangerous experiences with dangerous experiences. So this faulty alarm system, our overactive amygdala, leads to blowups or shutdowns in response to things that are very confusing. So if I maybe look at somebody in a way that they find threatening or dangerous, they're going to blow up at me or they're going to shut down, and I'm not really going to understand why. So again, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. So then there's the watchtower. So the smoke detector is the amygdala, and the frontal lobes, specifically the medial prefrontal cortex, located right here, is the watchtower. So it's offering our view from a scene on high. So that prefrontal cortex, that's our executive system. It allows for us to think long-term, think of like long-term consequences to the decisions that we're making, the behaviors that we're engaging in. So what happens with PTSD is the balance between the amygdala and the MPFC shifts. So it makes it a lot harder to control emotions and impulses. So the hope is that our watchtower, our prefrontal cortex, our MPFC is in charge. And like the amygdala, the limbic system, the thalamus, that they're working in conjunction with the executive system, but the executive system ultimately has final say because it's the most rational, it's the most logical. But it's like, I don't know, for those of you who, I always liken it to muscle memory, right? So if you go to the gym and you always work on like curls, you're growing your biceps, right? But then you may never work your triceps, so they become weak. that's probably a crappy analogy that I just used, but essentially what happens is if they're not being worked in tandem or in the appropriate proportions, then they're not going to function the way that they are able to. So it's essentially like constantly, so if the amygdala and the like limbic system is constantly being worked, that's going to become stronger. They're going to have more repetitions. And if you're never engaging the prefrontal cortex or the MPFC, it's going to atrophy. So same deal here. So the bottom up regulation involves recalibrating the autonomic nervous system. And that engage, so that's the bottom up. So re-engaging and recalibrating that. So essentially making it a little bit less active. And then the top down would be re-engaging the MPFC, the executive function, the prefrontal cortex. So whenever the limbic system decides that something is a question of life or death, the pathways between the frontal lobes and the limbic system become extremely tenuous. So here the limbic system is calling the shots here. And then any sort of research shows that very few psychological problems are actually the result of defects in understanding. They mostly originate with pressures from deeper regions of the brain that drive our perception and attention. So it's not really about necessarily insight or recognition so basically what Werner Kolk is saying is that if we're just trying to work on insight and understanding that we're missing the mark neurologically, that we might need to be doing something, that we likely need to be doing something that's like rewiring the brain. And when we read more of the book, we'll get to some of the treatment. So just, I say this to highlight to you that not to assume that the person isn't understanding what happened. That may be a piece, but if they express understanding, that it could very well be something that's going on neurologically for them or deeper in the brain. So when the alarm bell of the emotional brain keeps signaling that you are in danger, no amount of insight is going to silence it. I think the example, what was the example in the book of I think it was a veteran who would get like really mad or something. And what was the quote? It was like, it works great when I'm not mad or something like that. So like there's an awareness with it, but then you really have to restructure the affective response to things too. So with dissociation and reliving, if the trauma is not resolved, these stress hormones keep secreting to protect itself, and the defensive movements and emotional response keep getting replayed. So that's essentially what the reliving piece is this constant secretion of these stress hormones and the body never having a chance to kind of like recover and have that parasympathetic nervous system pop in there. So these intense and barely controllable urges and emotions that make people feel crazy, it makes them feel like they don't belong to humanity. So they're just, it's like they're not even a human being. So there's this depersonalization that happens as well. So from this, it's like I'm completely out of control. Nothing I do makes any sense. Shame shows up as the predominant emotion. And then with shame loves silence. So I'm not going to tell anybody about this. I'm just going to try to like suffer through this, or I'm going to try to figure this out by myself, because it is too excruciating for me to actually share my truth and admit that I'm struggling with this, or even, allow for that to be spoken. So please don't underestimate the role of shame in all of this as well. Individuals can sometimes rarely be in touch with the origins of their alienation. So this is where we come in. So we're bringing the emotions into where they were generated by the trauma. And so the person is able to feel and the capacity or feel themselves and understand themselves. And it says online. So that just basically means making sure that those portions of the brain, so again, that prefrontal cortex, that they're engaged, they're activated, so they're able to engage in that conversation about emotions in a way that they feel like they are in some kind of control, or they are making the connections from their traumatic experience to how they're feeling today. So the challenge is not so much learning to accept the terrible things that they've happened, but learning how to gain mastery over the internal sensations and emotions. So that's some of the most distressing piece of it, right? Is, this thing happened and now I'm reliving it and now I have no control over it. And I feel completely helpless, and the helplessness exacerbates this feeling of out of control, which lessens any sense of mastery, which would be beneficial. So it's kind of this cycle that an individual goes through. So sensing, naming, and identifying what's going on is the first step to recovery. So just making those connections and helping our clients do so. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop, and we'll come back to finish the last hour of class. So I'll see you guys at 12:10. All right, everyone, let's hop into the last portion of this. Okay, so I alluded to this a little bit earlier of the, kind of time and space of these intrusive, like relivings happening. So, when the timekeeper that is, in charge of us understanding chronology and the finite nature of certain experiences is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC, and the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is in charge of new memories. And so the DLPFC is what tells us how our present experience relates to the past and how it may affect the future. But it is essentially taken offline during traumatic experiences or the reliving of these experiences. So knowing what is happening is finite helps us to be a little less distressed about, or have a more tolerable experience. But when situations become interminable or they're timeless, and not in a good way, that they can become intolerable. So when we are working with individuals who have experienced trauma, we want to make sure that these individuals are firmly rooted and present, and they're feeling calm, safe, and grounded. And grounded was defined and is defined as like feeling your butt in your chair, feeling your feet on the ground, your hands on your armrest, being able to hear whatever's happening outside of the window. So just being very present. So the breaking down of the thalamus explains why a trauma is primarily remembered not as a story, a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end, but as isolated sensory input. So this is where the difficulty explaining chronologically, it's pretty fragmented when somebody's recalling a trauma. It's also accompanied by very intense emotions, lots of feelings of helplessness, of terror. So the understanding that the breakdown with the thalamus kind of going offline during a traumatic experience is what informs, okay, I just want to make sure I was recording, informs a response to it and what we're seeing in the room. So many treatment approaches for traumatic stress focus on desensitizing patients. And so again, he works in, I think he's a psychiatrist. But anyway, he works in a hospital setting, so that's why patients is being used here. So with the exception of re-exposure to their traumas, it can reduce emotional outbursts and flashbacks, but the solely working toward desensitizing individuals by like talking about it, van der Kolk believes is based on a misunderstanding of what happens in a traumatic stress response. So what people need help with is being able to live fully and securely in the present. So it's not so much about like in those times when they are feeling distress and terror from a trauma experience of desensitizing them to the past, it's more about living more fully in the present. So about, reducing constriction, about reducing intrusions, reducing dissociation. So, take it for what it is. It's not that desensitizing is inaccurate, it's just incomplete, where maybe that's an important piece of the healing, but also being able to be living this like fruitful, meaningful, happy, joyful, present life now. So in order to do that, in order to live more in the present, we have to help bring brain structures that were deserted when they were overwhelmed by the trauma back. So again, that's not like, we're not going in and rewiring or anything. We'll talk about treatment options and treatment approaches for that. Okay, so what I want to do right now is stop talking. I think I uploaded this to Canvas, right? Did I get, is this in Canvas, this PowerPoint? Okay, thank you. So what I want to do is break out into some rooms here. So understanding the stress response. So again, I pulled this from a school training. So wherever you see, what is it? I think student is in here somewhere. Yeah, a student who becomes agitated starts to yell at you, feel free to replace that with client or child or whatever. But what I want you guys to work on is ordering the experiences here from 1 to 7 in a stress response. So understanding, kind of taking a quiz a little bit on this. I will give you guys the correct answers for it. No cheating, but you do actually have access to this in Canvas. I did upload the packet that this came from. So if you've looked at it, okay. But I would like for you to just take a stab at this. And then after you do that, then I would like for you to discuss these questions as well. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of a chance to interact with one another. So these are slides 32 and 33 in your PowerPoint. And I believe, who was it? Paige, was it you that asked for the, remember when we did this exercise last time when we talked about relabeling from a trauma? Was that you that asked for it, Paige? So it's in there. I think I put it under resources or class resources or something like that. So please don't check right now. So we'll go through this. So I want you guys to complete slide 32 with your group. I'll put you into breakout rooms and then discuss slide 33. So I'll give you guys 20 minutes to do this so we can come back together at 12:35.
Lappin, before we go into breakout rooms,
Yeah, sure.
Could you give us access to share our screen? Because when we're in our breakout rooms, we can't share. And I think it'd be easier if we just shared the PowerPoint.
Do you know how to do that?
You should have a button at the bottom of the Zoom that says security.
Okay.
And then from there, something should say allow participants to share screen or something like that.
I have, oh, yep. That was very clear right there. Yeah, so you should all be able to do that now. Thank you so much for that, Miles. I didn't even know it was a thing. Okay, so I'm creating the breakout rooms now and I will see you back. Let's go 12:40. So I just wanted to take time to make sure that you guys got it in the right order. So I'm going to finish class with a progressive relaxation. So we'll take about 5 minutes to do this and make sure that we're all on the same page about the kind of response cycle. And then we'll finish with some calming stuff to send you on about your day. Okay, so I'll just have us all interact with this. So what was stress response number 1 that you guys came up with?
Could you share your screen again?
Okay, I gotcha. I gotta make sure they don't have all the answers on my screen. I tucked it way away. All right, where is my screen? Here it is. All right, so what did you guys put? What did you all put as stress response number 1?
We put you're interacting with a client who becomes agitated and starts to yell at you, accusing you of purposefully not helping them.
Perfect. That is number 1. What is number 2?
We put your emotional brain senses, I think, hopefully, or correct me if I'm wrong about the choice, but your emotional brain senses a potential threat to your physical, emotional well-being and sets off the alarm.
Yep, perfect. So number 1, you're interacting with a student. Number 2, your emotional brain senses a potential threat. Perfect. Number 3.
We said then your thinking brain checks things out and confirms the threat's real.
Yep. All right, number 4.
This is when your thinking brain shuts off so that your emotional brain can take over.
All right. Yes, that is it. Number 5.
Fight, flight, freeze response.
Perfect. Number 6.
Your reaction, raising your voice.
Perfect. And then by process of elimination, number 7.
Your thinking brain comes back on to help your body calm down.
Perfect. Nice work, everybody. Okay, so yes, you have all of those answers also on Canvas. But in the meantime, to finish class, let's go ahead and do some progressive relaxation, get y'all nice and calm and stiff, moving about your day. Okay, so as always, feel free to turn off your camera, do whatever feels right for you right now. And, you know, sit on your floor, lay on your couch, just make sure that you can hear this. So I'm going to ask about volume, and something might come on here. Yeah. No.
During the muscle relaxation exercise, you will be asked to tense your
Are we good with volume? I can't see.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so here we go.
muscles and then release. This letting go motion will help relax the muscles of your body. Muscle relaxation leads to mental calmness. So this exercise will not only relax your body, but it will also help quiet your mind. If there are any areas in your body that are prone to pain or injury, such as your neck or back, you can apply less tension, or you can leave this area out altogether. During this relaxation exercise, you may find your mind wandering into thoughts or worries, and this is normal. When this happens, try to release these thoughts and relax back to the sound of my voice and focus on the exercise. Just try to relax and follow the instructions as best as you can. So take a moment now to settle into a comfortable position. Go ahead and shift around until your body feels comfortable and at ease. When you're ready, you may close your eyes. Now through your nose, take a slow, deep breath. Hold it for a moment. And now slowly exhale. Notice that a feeling of relaxation can begin to develop as you breathe out. Take another slow, deep breath. Hold. And now let go. With every breath, you can allow yourself to become more and more relaxed. Now tense your forehead by raising your eyebrows as high as you can. As you hold this tension, notice where your forehead feels tense. And now, relax your forehead. Notice how it feels to have the muscles soften, to give way to relaxation. Let all the tension drain from your forehead. And now for your eyes and nose. Close your eyes very tightly and wrinkle your nose. Become aware of the tension in your eyes, nose, and the upper parts of your cheeks. And now, relax. Notice the discomfort fade away, replaced by a calm, relaxed feeling. And now your mouth and jaw. Put your mouth into a forced smile and clench your teeth very tightly. Your lips and cheeks and jaw should feel very tense. And now, relax those muscles. Relax your face. And notice the feeling as the muscles loosen. Your teeth part slightly. Your face and jaw become more and more relaxed. And now, relax your face a little bit more. Breathe in deeply. Hold. And breathe out. Relax and let go. Now tense the muscles of the neck and shoulders by shrugging your shoulders. Try to touch your ears with your shoulders. Feel the tension in your shoulders and neck. And now let go. Feel your shoulders becoming much more comfortable. Feel the relief as tension gives way to relaxation. Now moving on to your arms. Please put your palms of your hands together and push them together. Feel the tension in your arms and shoulders. Hold this position. And now let go. Let all the tension flow out of your forearms, out of your hands. Let your hands rest comfortably on your armrests, completely at ease. Relax your hands. Relax your arms. Relax your shoulders. Now focus on your breathing and your abdominal muscles. Take a deep breath through your nose. Hold it and breathe out. Feel the sense of relief in your chest as you breathe out. Again, breathe in deeply through your nose. Hold it. Notice the feeling. And now breathe out. Now moving down your body, keeping your face, back, arms, and chest as relaxed as you can. Arch your back as though you have a pillow under the middle and lower part of your back. Draw your shoulder blades together as though you want them to touch your spine. Now hold this position. And let go. Let the relaxation spread and flow deeply into the muscles of your back. With every breath, allow the relaxation to go deeper. And now for your abdomen. Tighten your abdomen by drawing your belly button backwards towards your spine, and then hold this position. And now relax. Soften your abdomen. Feel your belly becoming more and more relaxed. All the tension being replaced with relaxation. Now begin the relaxation of your hips and legs. Tighten your buttocks, hips, and legs by pressing down the heels of your feet towards the ground. Tighten all these muscles. Feel the tension in your buttocks, thighs, and calves. And now release. Feel the tension leave your buttocks, leave your thighs, and leave your calves. Let the relaxation spread deeper and deeper. Now curl your toes and tighten the muscles of your feet. Feel the tension in your feet and toes. And now release. Feel the sense of relief as the tension is replaced by relaxation. Enjoy this feeling. Feel yourself becoming heavier and heavier. Now scan your entire body. Allow your awareness to focus on each part and allow any remnants of tension to drain away. Scan your forehead. Relax and soften. Around your eyes and nose. Release and let go. Your mouth and your jaw. Continue to breathe slowly and deeply. Your whole face can relax as you continue to scan your awareness down the rest of your body. Your neck, relax and let go. Your shoulders, your arms, and now your chest. Relax and soften. Your belly, your buttocks, and your hips. Your back, your legs, and your feet. Allow any remaining tension to flow down your body, down your feet, and out of your toes. Relax and let go. Feel yourself becoming more and more deeply relaxed. You're calm, secure, at peace.
All right, everyone. So I hope you're feeling nice and relaxed. I'll go ahead and finish class with that. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you next Tuesday, but not the Tuesday after. See y'all.
Thanks, Dr. Lappin.